April 20th, 1945. Rokus Misch, 27 years old, stood at his post in the corridor of the Führerbunker, 8.5 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. The concrete walls around him were 4 meters thick, but he could feel the vibrations through his boots. Soviet artillery, somewhere to the east, was finding its range. It was Hitler's 56th birthday. Above ground, in what remained of Berlin's government quarter, a small ceremony had taken place that morning. It would be the last time Hitler ever saw daylight. Misch had watched him emerge from the bunker entrance, blinking in the pale spring sun, to inspect a line of Hitler youth boys who'd been brought to receive medals. The Führer's left hand trembled as he pinned decorations on children, some no older than 12, then retreated back underground. Now, as afternoon faded to evening, Misch listened to the rhythm of distant explosions. He'd been Hitler's bodyguard and telephone operator since 1940. He knew the sound of artillery. These were heavy guns getting closer. Traudl Junge, 25, one of Hitler's personal secretaries, sat in her small room typing. The bunker complex housed between 300 and 500 people now, crammed into spaces designed for far fewer. The air smelled of diesel fuel from the generators, of damp concrete, of too many unwashed bodies in too little space. Every few minutes, a deeper rumble would shake dust from the ceiling onto her papers. She would later write about the strange disconnect of those days. We lived in a netherworld, she remembered. Above us, Berlin was dying. Below, we typed letters and drank coffee as if the war were happening on another planet. But the war was coming closer. April 21st, Soviet forces had broken through the final defensive rings around Berlin. Artillery batteries were being positioned within direct range of the city center. By afternoon, shells were hitting the government quarter with increasing frequency. Heinz Linger, Hitler's valet, was helping him dress when the first shell struck close enough to rattle the bunker's ventilation system. Hitler paused, his shirt half-buttoned, and looked up at the concrete ceiling. His hands, which trembled constantly now from what doctors suspected was Parkinson's disease, shook harder. "How close?" Hitler asked. Linger didn't know. No one knew exactly. The bunker had no windows, no direct view of the surface. Information came through telephone lines and messengers who braved the dash from other buildings. "I'll find out, my Führer," Linger said. Hitler resumed dressing, but Linger noticed him glancing at the ceiling repeatedly. The man who'd ordered the conquest of Europe now lived in a concrete box, waiting for news from the world above. The military briefing that afternoon was tense. Officers crowded into the small conference room in the upper bunker, the Führerbunker, where Hitler held his daily situation conferences. Maps covered the table, showing Soviet forces closing from east, north, and south. American and British forces approached from the west. Gerhard Bolt, a Wehrmacht officer, stood against the wall taking notes. He would later describe the scene. Hitler hunched over the maps, his reading glasses sliding down his nose, one hand pressed flat on the table to stop its shaking. Outside the room, the muffled crump of artillery fire provided constant background noise. Hitler asked about relief forces. When were they coming? Which units were moving to break the Soviet encirclement? The answers were evasive. Units that existed on paper had melted away. Divisions were reduced to battalion strength. The relief wasn't coming. Hitler's voice remained quiet, but Bolt noticed the trembling in his hand had spread to his entire arm. April 22nd. The day everything broke. The morning briefing began normally, if anything in the bunker could be called normal. Then, Hitler received word that SS General Felix Steiner's attack, which was supposed to break the Soviet ring north of Berlin, had not taken place. Steiner's forces were too weak. The attack was impossible. What happened next was witnessed by more than 20 people crowded into the conference room. Hitler exploded. Officers who'd served with him for years had seen him rage before. But this was different. This wasn't calculated fury for effect. This was something breaking. "Everyone has lied to me," Hitler screamed. His face turned crimson. Spit flew from his mouth. "Everyone has betrayed me. There is no loyalty, no honor. The entire Wehrmacht has lied from the start." He threw his pencil across the room. His whole body shook. Officers pressed against the walls. Silent. "The war is lost," Hitler shouted. The words hung in the stale air. He'd never said it before, not like this. "But if you think I will leave Berlin, you are mistaken. I will stay here. I will defend the city. And when the end comes, I will shoot myself." The room was silent except for Hitler's ragged breathing and the distant thunder of artillery. Traudl Junge, summoned to take dictation afterward, found him slumped in a chair, suddenly calm. "It's over," he told her quietly. "I will stay in Berlin. I will fall here. You should go. Try to get out while you can." She didn't go. None of them did. Not yet. That evening, the bombardment intensified. Soviet artillery had moved closer. Now shells were hitting the Reich Chancellery building directly above the bunker. The impact sent shock waves through the concrete. Rokas Misch was at his telephone switchboard when a shell hit close enough to make the lights flicker. The explosion was so loud it hurt his ears even through 8 meters of earth and concrete. Dust rained from the ceiling. Someone down the corridor screamed. Misch picked up the phone to check the lines. Still working. He looked at Johannes Henschel, the electrician who maintained the bunker's systems. Henschel's face was pale. "The upper bunker took that one," Henschel said. "I should check the ceiling." He returned 20 minutes later. "Cracks," he reported to Misch. "Not serious yet, but they're getting through the building above us." The bunker had 2 levels. The upper level, the Führerbunker, housed kitchens, storage, and quarters for some staff. The lower level, the Führerbunker proper, was deeper, safer, but not invulnerable. If the Soviets brought up their heaviest guns, if they scored direct hits repeatedly on the same spot. No one wanted to finish that thought. April 23rd. The bombardment became constant. There was no longer day or night in any meaningful sense. The bunker's occupants lost track of time. Some tried to maintain routines. Hitler still held his military briefings, though they'd become surreal exercises in denial. Traudl Junge still typed letters. The kitchen staff still prepared meals, though supplies were running low, but the shelling never stopped. Every few minutes, sometimes every few seconds, the bunker shook. Dust fell continuously. The air grew thicker, despite the ventilation system working at full capacity. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with concrete dust created a fog that burned the throat. People reacted differently. Some of the secretaries and staff tried to maintain normalcy. They played cards in the small common room, speaking loudly to be heard over the rumbling. They told jokes. They pretended. Others drank. The bunker's wine cellar was well stocked. By evening, officers and staff members stumbled through corridors, drunk, trying to forget where they were. Martin Bormann, Hitler's party secretary, maintained an eerie efficiency. He worked at his desk, writing orders, managing the party bureaucracy that still existed on paper, as if the Reich weren't collapsing around him. When shells hit particularly close, he would pause, look up at the ceiling, then return to his papers. The eye. Goebbels' family had moved into the bunker. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, brought his wife Magda and their 6 children. The children, ranging from 4 to 12 years old, didn't fully understand what was happening. Traudl Junge would later describe hearing the children singing in their rooms, trying to drown out the sound of explosions. Their voices, high and innocent, echoed through concrete corridors while Soviet shells demolished the city above. It was the most surreal thing, Junge remembered. Children singing nursery rhymes while the world ended. Hitler emerged from his private quarters less frequently now. When he did appear for briefings, People noticed his deterioration. His shuffle had become more pronounced. His hand trembling was constant. His eyes, which had once commanded rooms, seemed unfocused. But his voice, when he spoke, still carried authority. "How is the situation above?" he asked during the evening briefing on April the 23rd. And Suam, officer, reported the Reich Chancellery was heavily damaged. The gardens were cratered. Fires burned throughout the government quarter. Soviet forces were within 2 kilometers of the bunker's location. Hitler nodded slowly. "And the relief forces?" Silence. There were no relief forces. Everyone in the room knew it. "They will come," Hitler said quietly, more to himself than to the officers. "They must come." April 24th. A shell penetrated the upper bunker. Rokas Mish was in the corridor when it happened. The explosion was different from the others, sharper, closer. The lights went out completely for several seconds. When the emergency lighting kicked in, people were screaming. The shell had punched through the damaged Reich Chancellery building above and detonated in one of the upper bunker's storage rooms. No one was killed, but the message was clear. The bunker was no longer invulnerable. Johannes Henschel inspected the damage with a flashlight. The concrete ceiling of the upper bunker showed a crater where the shell had impacted. Cracks radiated outward. Water dripped from a broken pipe. "The lower bunker is still safe," Henschel reported to anyone who would listen. "The Führer's quarters are still safe." But his voice lacked conviction. That night the atmosphere in the bunker changed. The pretense of normalcy cracked. People spoke in hushed voices, when they spoke at all. The card games stopped. Even the drinking seemed more desperate than escapist. Mish sat at his switchboard, monitoring phone lines that connected to fewer and fewer locations. Parts of Berlin were simply gone, their telephone exchanges destroyed. The world was shrinking. Eva Braun, Hitler's companion, remained oddly cheerful. She moved through the bunker in her best dresses, her hair carefully styled, as if attending a social event. She organized small gatherings in her room, serving wine and playing music on a gramophone. Traudl Junge attended one of these gatherings. "Eva acted as if we were at a party," Junge would recall. "She laughed and made small talk while the walls shook. I think she'd decided how this would end, and she'd made peace with it." April 25th. Soviet and American forces met at the Elbe River, cutting Germany in half. In the bunker, no one knew. Communications were breaking down. The bombardment reached new intensity. Soviet artillery had moved to point-blank range. Heavy guns fired directly into the government quarter. The impacts came so frequently they blended into continuous thunder. Heinz Linger helped Hitler through his daily routine. Shaving, dressing, the pretense of normalcy. Hitler's hands shook so badly now that Linger had to help him button his uniform jacket. "What time is it?" Hitler asked. Linger told him. Hitler nodded but seemed confused. Time had lost meaning in the bunker. There were no windows, no natural light, just the yellow glow of electric bulbs and the endless shaking. "Is it day or night?" Hitler asked. "Day, my Führer. Early afternoon." Hitler looked at the concrete ceiling. "It sounds the same." The military briefings had become exercises in fantasy. Officers reported on the movements of armies that no longer existed. Hitler issued orders to units that had been destroyed days ago. Maps showed positions that bore no relationship to reality, but everyone played along. What else could they do? Gerhard Bolt watched Hitler trace lines on the map with a trembling finger, describing counterattacks that would never happen, relief forces that would never arrive. The other officers nodded and took notes. Outside the room, another shell hit close enough to make the light fixtures sway. April 26th. Food supplies were running low. The kitchen staff began rationing. Meals became smaller, simpler. Rokas Mish ate his lunch at his post, a thin soup and a piece of black bread. The bread was stale. possibly moldy. He ate it anyway. Above him, the bombardment continued without pause. A messenger arrived from one of the outer defense positions, his uniform torn and bloody. He'd run through streets under direct fire to reach the Reich Chancellery. His message: Soviet forces were 3 blocks away. They'd be at the bunker's entrance within hours, perhaps less. Hitler received the news calmly. "Then we will defend," he said simply. But defend with what? The SS guards around the bunker numbered fewer than 50 men. They had small arms, some machine guns, a few Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. Outside, 3 Soviet armies were converging on the government quarter. That evening, Hitler dictated a message to be sent to remaining German forces. "Hold your positions. Fight to the last man." Relief is coming. Traudl Junge typed the words, her fingers mechanical on the keys. She no longer believed anything in the messages she typed. She wondered if Hitler believed them either. April 27th. The Soviets began their final assault on the government quarter. The bombardment shifted. Instead of random shelling, the fire became concentrated, systematic. Soviet forces were clearing buildings block by block, using artillery to soften defenses before infantry advanced. In the bunker, the impacts became more frequent, more violent. The entire structure shook continuously now. Dust hung in the air so thick it was hard to breathe. People tied handkerchiefs over their faces. Johannes Henschel worked frantically to keep the ventilation system running. The filters were clogged with dust. The diesel generators were overheating. Water was seeping into the lower levels from broken pipes above. "How long can we last?" someone asked him. Henschel didn't answer. He didn't know. Hitler held a briefing that afternoon. Fewer officers attended now. Some had fled. Others were dead. Those who remained looked like ghosts, pale and hollow-eyed in the dim light. Hitler asked about the relief forces again. When would General Wenck's army arrive from the west? When would they break through? An officer, braver or more foolish than the others, told the truth. "My Führer, General Wenck's forces are engaged with the Americans. They cannot reach Berlin." Hitler stared at the map. His hand, resting on the table, trembled so violently it made the papers shake. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "I see." That was all. He dismissed the briefing and shuffled back to his private quarters. Heinz Linger found him an hour later, sitting on the sofa in his small living room. Hitler was staring at the wall, his dog Blondie at his feet. The dog, a German shepherd, was the only creature in the bunker that seemed unaffected by the bombardment. "My Führer," Linger said softly. Hitler looked up. "Linger, sit with me." Linger sat. They remained there in silence while the bunker shook around them. Hitler stroked the dog's head. His hand still trembled, but the motion seemed to calm him. "It will be over, soon," Hitler said finally. "One way or another." April 28th. Soviet infantry reached the Reich Chancellery building. The sound changed. Along with the artillery, there was now rifle fire, machine gun bursts, the sharp crack of Panzerfausts. The battle was directly above the bunker now. Rokas Misch could hear German voices shouting, returning fire. The SS guards were fighting in the ruins above. How long could they hold? A wounded guard stumbled down into the bunker, his face bloody. "They're everywhere," he gasped. "Hundreds of them. We can't hold." More guards retreated into the bunker. The outer defenses were collapsing. Hitler emerged from his quarters and asked for a report. An SS officer explained, "Soviet forces controlled most of the Reich Chancellery building. They were fighting room by room toward the bunker entrance. It was only a matter of time." Hitler nodded. He looked almost relieved. "Then it is decided," he said. That evening, he summoned several people to his quarters. Eva Braun was there, and Goebbels and Bormann. They spoke quietly. When they emerged, Eva was smiling. Traudl Junge learned the news from one of the other secretaries. Hitler and Eva Braun were getting married. Tonight, in the bunker, while Soviet soldiers fought in the building above. The ceremony took place just before midnight. A city official was found, brought to the bunker to perform the civil service. Hitler and Eva stood before him in the small conference room while shells shook the walls. The official's hands trembled as he read the brief ceremony. Hitler and Eva exchanged simple gold rings. There were no flowers, no music, just the rumble of artillery and the rattle of machine gun fire from above. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the official said. Hitler kissed Eva briefly. A few people clapped. Someone opened champagne. The wedding party that followed was the strangest gathering Traudl Junge had ever witnessed. About 10 people crowded into Hitler's small living room. They drank champagne and made small talk while the battle raged overhead. Eva laughed at someone's joke. Hitler smiled, his hand resting on her shoulder. It was like a dream, Junge would later write, or a nightmare. I couldn't tell which. We were celebrating a marriage while the world ended. The party lasted about 2 hours. Then Hitler dismissed everyone except Traudl Junge. He wanted to dictate his will and his political testament. Junge sat with her typewriter. Hitler paced the small room, speaking slowly, pausing frequently as explosions shook the bunker. He dictated his justification for the war, his blame for others, his final orders to the German people. Junge typed mechanically, not really processing the words. When he finished, dawn was approaching. April 29th was beginning. Hitler signed the documents. Then he did something unexpected. He asked Junge about herself. Where was she from? What would she do after the war? "I don't know, my Führer," she said honestly. "You should try to get out," Hitler said. "You're young. You have a life ahead of you." It was the kindest thing he'd said to her in years. April 29th continued with the same relentless bombardment. Soviet forces controlled everything above ground now. The bunker was completely cut off. Food was nearly gone. The kitchen served watery soup twice a day. Water was rationed. The air was foul despite the ventilation system's best efforts. Hitler spent most of the day in his quarters. He emerged once for a brief military briefing, but there was nothing to brief. No communications, no reports, no armies left to command. That afternoon, he ordered his dog, Blondie, killed. He couldn't bear the thought of the Soviets capturing her. A doctor administered poison. Hitler didn't watch. Heinz Linger found him afterward, sitting alone, crying. It was the only time Linger ever saw him cry. Evening. Hitler summoned his closest staff. He said goodbye to them individually, shaking hands, thanking them for their service. His hand trembled in theirs. He gave Rokas Misch a photograph of himself, signed. "For your loyalty," Hitler said. Misch would keep that photograph for the rest of his life, hidden away, a relic of the strangest years of his existence. Night fell. The bombardment never stopped. Soviet forces were now fighting in the bunker complex itself, in the upper levels. Gunfire echoed through the corridors. Hitler and Eva retired to their quarters. The door closed. April 30th. The final day. Morning was relatively quiet. The bombardment continued but seemed less intense. Perhaps the Soviets were regrouping for a final assault. Hitler emerged from his quarters around noon. He was dressed in his uniform, his hair combed, his appearance as neat as his trembling hands would allow. He ate lunch with his secretaries and several staff members. No one spoke much. The food was almost gone, just some pasta with thin sauce. After lunch, Hitler said goodbye again to those present. He shook hands. He told them to try to escape, to get out of Berlin if they could. Then he and Eva returned to their quarters. Heinz Linger and Otto Günsche Hitler's SS adjutant, stood guard outside the door. Inside, they heard low voices, then silence. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, a single gunshot. Linger and Günscher waited several minutes, then opened the door. Hitler sat on the sofa, dead from a gunshot to the head. Eva lay beside him, dead from cyanide poisoning. The smell of almonds and gunpowder filled the small room. Above them, the bombardment continued. Soviet shells still fell on the ruined Reich chancellery. The battle still raged. But in the bunker, in that small concrete room, it was over. The bodies were carried up to the garden, doused with gasoline, and burned in a shell crater while Soviet artillery fire continued. Those who remained in the bunker watched the flames, then retreated back underground. The bombardment went on through the night. May 1st. Joseph Goebbels, now the designated leader of what remained of the Reich, lasted less than 24 hours. He and his wife poisoned their 6 children, then killed themselves. The remaining occupants of the bunker tried to break out through Soviet lines. Most were captured or killed. Rokas Misch was captured by Soviet forces on May 2nd. He would spend 9 years in Soviet prison camps. Traudl Junge escaped through the ruins of Berlin and survived the war. She would spend the rest of her life trying to understand how she had ended up in that bunker. Heinz Linger was captured and imprisoned until 1955. Johannes Henschel, the electrician, stayed in the bunker and surrendered to Soviet forces when they finally entered. He explained the generator systems to them, then was released. The bombardment of Berlin officially ended on May 2nd, 1945, when the remaining German forces in the city surrendered. The Führerbunker, that concrete tomb beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, was eventually sealed and buried. It still exists somewhere beneath modern Berlin, a chamber of echoes and dust. Those who survived carried the memories of those final days for the rest of their lives. The constant shaking, the dust falling from concrete ceilings, the smell of diesel and fear, the sounds of a world ending, one shell at a time. Rokas Misch, in his final interviews before his death in 2013 at age 96, was asked what he remembered most about the bunker's final days. He thought for a long moment. "The noise," he said finally. "The endless noise. And how quiet it became after the gunshot. For just a moment, everything stopped. Then the shelling started again. That silence, brief and terrible, was the sound of an empire ending. Not with a grand battle or a dramatic last stand, but with a single gunshot in a concrete room, while Soviet shells continued to fall on the ruins above.